Unfortunately, if you don't buy a home with the following criteria, you're gonna have a hard time selling it. You're not gonna maximize your profits. And ultimately, if you wanna buy a home with resale value in mind, these are things you absolutely must be thinking of. So let's get into it. Number one, every single real estate agent will tell you our golden rule is location, location, location. You absolutely must keep this in mind. This is the one thing that you cannot change about the property that you're buying or that you're interested in. It's the location. So the rule of thumb for around here, at least, I always tell people, don't buy a house on a really busy road, a main road in town. Why are you buying a house on Route 1? Why would you want to? Another thing, roads that have really high speed limits, even if it's not necessarily one of the main roads in town, it's not Route 1. If you're buying a home and the speed limit on that road is 50, 60 miles an hour, it's immediately less attractive to people. Another thing to keep in mind that's not as important to everybody, but the amount of privacy that a property has. Obviously, if you're buying a home in a neighborhood, there's less privacy involved with that. But generally speaking, for a lot of people that are moving to Maine, they're looking for, a slower pace of life. They're looking for a little bit more privacy. They're looking for a little bit more land. And, depending on where the house is, if you're buying one in a neighborhood, again, it's not necessarily as big of a deal. But privacy, even with just like having some trees on your property, people are looking for that. Going off of that, kind of the exterior elements of a home, your curb appeal, people's first impressions when they walk up to a house are huge. And I'm not saying you have to have any sort of crazy landscaping. And if anything, that's kind of intimidating to people. But generally speaking, mow your lawn, blow off your driveway, de-weed your garden a little bit, and make the curb appeal for what you have on that home nicer if you're going to sell it. So now let's talk about the layout of the property. So I wouldn't say necessarily a ranch versus a cape or a colonial is necessarily like, your house isn't gonna sell for way more money just because it's a colonial style home, right? Generally speaking, the house should fit into whatever area you're buying it in. So if you, for example, are looking on Wells Beach, you're going to want, a 2-story home with maybe cedar shingles. It's got to look like a coastal New England style house for you to really make a great return on your investment there. If it's a really modern style home and then there's a bunch of New England coastal style homes around it, it sticks out. It looks a little bit weird to some people. Generally speaking, you want your house to kind of match the general look of the houses around it, unless you're like way in the woods, then you can't see the neighbors around you, then things are a little bit different. But generally speaking, your home should look like the others around it. Also, the layout of the home. People don't want closed concept. This is a little controversial. Open concept homes in more recent history have been more in style. Some people, it's kind of coming into style to not like that, to want more closed concept. I generally say to people, the rule of thumb is look for a home that it doesn't have to be a square and your living room, your kitchen, your dining room are all in one area, but you don't want a dining room, a narrow skinny hallway, a living room, a narrow skinny hallway in your kitchen. You want things to be somewhat open, nothing too closed off. The more open concept, what I'm finding is the better right now. Another thing to take into consideration is the fact that people really want at least 3 bedrooms, 2 full bathrooms. If your house only has 2 bedrooms, you're gonna have a harder time selling it. That's not a guaranteed thing. Homes with 1 bedroom sell, you know what I mean? But generally speaking, a lot of times, especially for families, they're looking for at least 3 bedrooms, 2 full bathrooms. It's something important to think about. And lastly, regarding the layout of your home, try to find a home with a lot of natural light. Obviously, this isn't really the most important factor, but it is something people do think about when they're searching for a home. People immediately notice if the natural light in a home is bad. They don't necessarily notice if it's really good, but they do notice when it's bad. So make sure you're not picking a home that's necessarily too dark. If you have the money set aside, maybe put in an extra window or 2 if it's at all possible, but try to pick a home with good natural light, because you can capitalize off of that. All right, so if you already have the home, and you're looking to now sell it again, what are some things you should be thinking about? Paint colors. If you want a bright orange wall, let your freak flag fly. If you like it, go for it. But when you're going to resell your home, nobody wants a neon orange wall, and why would they? So as far as going to sell your home goes, again, if you have it in your budget, if you've painted a wall purple or orange or red or whatever color it may be, unless it's like an emerald green or a navy, the more neutral, the more boring, the better. People have a harder time envisioning themselves in a space that doesn't look like something that they would necessarily live in. Again, it's not a determining factor, but if you have it in your budget to be, you know, more neutral with your color palette, I would absolutely say it's worth investing in some paint, painting the walls. You know, it doesn't have to be white, but you know, an eggshell color, something more neutral, more boring, so that people can kind of envision themselves in the home better. Another thing with furniture, around here, we really don't stage homes a lot unless it's, you know, something really impressive or really expensive. A lot of times it's just not worth the money. But generally speaking, with your furniture, if you have anything like really crazy, it's not a big deal. I mean, it's not as important, I would say, especially if you're not leaving behind the furniture, you know, but the more boring, the better. Again, it helps people envision themselves in the home. And then again, kind of on a separate note, when you're going to actually sell the house and do showings with it, some people say that family photos are great. Some people don't like family photos hung up on the walls. Different real estate agents will tell you different things. With family photos, people kind of, you know, oh, you know, I could envision my family in this house. Without family photos, people can kind of envision it more, is the other argument. You know, they don't want to see somebody else living in a home that could potentially be theirs. It's a mental thing. I always like to say, maybe we don't have a whole gallery wall of photos hung up, you know, but it's totally fine to leave out a few somewhere in the middle. I don't think it's a big deal, but some real estate agents do. All right, next let's talk about appliances. You don't have to have new appliances to maximize the investment on your home by any means, but people like stainless steel, okay? If your appliances are relatively updated and you have stainless steel appliances, no need to go out and get the next best thing. Realistically, people don't want white appliances, but if all your appliances are white, it's not as big of a deal to people. But generally speaking, if they're relatively new, they match, especially if they're stainless steel, great. People just don't want your white fridge that belongs in your garage from, you know, 1992 in their actual kitchen. And lastly, let's talk about storage. A lot of houses don't have great storage, unfortunately. It's not really something that enough people think about. The more storage, the better. And I don't think people really stress this enough, whether it's shelves in your attic, shelves in your basement, shelves in your garage. If you have a pantry in the house, the more ample storage, the better. Storage under the beds. People love to see that. And then again, it's kind of one of those things where people aren't going to notice if there's not a ton of storage right off the bat, but when there is a lot of storage, people do notice it and people seem to love it. As far as my experience goes in selling real estate, the more storage, the absolute better. So again, the location, the layout, be boring with your paint colors, you know, update any appliances if possible, and try to find a home with ample storage. Eventually your home is going to sell, but to maximize the investment that you've made in that property, if you're going into a home, looking at it, you know, thinking about resale value, these are things that you should keep in mind. If you happen to buy a house that, you know, isn't the most open concept, again, it's not, you know, eventually you'll sell your house, you know. It's not the only determining factor, but it definitely helps if things are more open concept. It helps when the walls aren't all bright yellow. These are all just important things to be thinking about. My name's Margaret, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and we'll see you next time.